You were close. You could feel it. The job, the relationship, the project you had been building for longer than you want to admit. And then, not a setback from outside, not bad luck, not another person. Something happened from inside. A reason to wait. A flaw you suddenly noticed. A version of yourself that felt, at the last moment, like the wrong person for what was about to happen. Carl Jung spent 40 years studying that moment. Not what happened after it. The mechanism that produced it. He found that self-sabotage is not random. It is not weakness. It is not fear of failure. It is a psychic structure, precise, consistent, and almost entirely invisible to the person it governs. He called it the shadow, and his conclusion was one of the most uncomfortable things he ever documented. You did not sabotage yourself despite wanting to succeed. You sabotaged yourself because you did. To understand why, you need to understand what the shadow actually is, not the popular definition. Not the idea that the shadow is your dark side, your aggression, your envy, the parts of yourself you are ashamed of. That is a useful beginning, but Jung's actual framework is considerably more precise and considerably more uncomfortable. The shadow is formed in childhood, not by trauma alone, by the ordinary, relentless process of learning what you are permitted to be. Every environment communicates a version of acceptable. The qualities that fit within that version, you absorbed, you developed them, you built an identity around them. The qualities that did not fit, and here is what matters, were not discarded. They cannot be discarded. Psychological material cannot be eliminated. It can only be displaced. So it went into the shadow. The ambition that felt like arrogance. The desire that felt like selfishness. The refusal that felt like ingratitude. The drive that the environment communicated was too much. And this is the part that most people miss. The shadow also contains what you were taught you did not deserve. Not just the qualities that were wrong, the outcomes that were forbidden. Success, recognition, the full, undiminished expression of what you are capable of. If the conditions of your formation communicated, directly or through the behavior of the people around you, that these things were dangerous or selfish, or that having them would make you unrecognizable to those who mattered most, those desires went into the shadow too, and the shadow is not inert. It does not simply wait. It operates. Jung's clinical observation, the one he returned to across decades of analytical practice, was this: when a person approaches the boundary of what they unconsciously believe they are permitted to have, the shadow activates. Not with obvious resistance, not with fear they can name, with a behavior that looks, from the inside, exactly like a rational decision. A distraction at the wrong moment. A conflict that materializes precisely when momentum is building. A flaw in the plan that was not visible before, but is suddenly, urgently, impossible to ignore. Jung called this the self-limitation of the psyche, the unconscious enforcing the ceiling it was taught to respect. The ceiling is not imposed on you. The ceiling is you. Jung documented this mechanism first in the clinical setting. But the evidence does not stay in the consulting room. It is structural, it repeats, and once you see the shape of it, you begin to recognize it everywhere, including in places you have not yet been willing to look. The first example is the one Jung encountered most frequently. A patient presents with a specific pattern. They leave situations, jobs, relationships, creative projects, opportunities, at the moment those situations become real. Not when things deteriorate, not when the fit is wrong, when things begin to work. The explanations are always coherent. A better opportunity appeared, incompatibility that was always there finally became clear. The timing simply wasn't right. The environment wasn't supportive. The people involved weren't ready. Jung's observation was not about the explanations. It was about the altitude. Every exit is taken at the same point, just before the threshold where staying would require the person to become someone they have not been given permission to be. The exits change. The altitude does not. That is the shadow maintaining the ceiling. The second example is closer. You have completed something, a piece of work that represents genuine effort over genuine time. Something that, if you are honest, is the closest thing to a full expression of your capability you have produced. And at the moment of completion, the only remaining step is to put it into the world, to send it, to submit it, to show it to the person who needs to see it. And the thought arrives, it's not ready. There's something wrong with it that I can't quite name, but I can feel. One more revision, one more pass. When it's better, I'll send it. Jung would not call this perfectionism. Perfectionism is a conscious standard. What he observed in his patients was different, a threshold phenomenon. The work is fine. The work has been fine for some time. What is not fine is the person the work would make visible. The shadow is not protecting the work from being seen before it is ready. The shadow is protecting you from being seen at all. The third example is the one that requires the most stillness to acknowledge. You have had the thought, not the productive thought, not the motivated thought about what you are working toward. The other one, the one that arrives when the thing you want is close enough to be real. What if I don't actually want this? What if I've been wrong about myself the whole time? What if the person who gets this isn't really me, and everyone is about to find that out? Notice how specific that thought is. Notice that it does not arrive when the goal is far away. It arrives when the goal is near. Jung's framework says that thought is not honest self-reflection. It is the shadow announcing that the ceiling is close. It will keep producing that thought, each time slightly more convincing, each time more difficult to dismiss as fear, until you either cross the threshold or step back from it. Most people step back and file it under something more acceptable than what it actually was. Set aside the examples. Think about the specific thing you have not finished, not the thing you abandoned because it was wrong, not the relationship that ended because it was damaging, not the project that failed because the conditions were impossible, the thing you abandoned when it was working, the version of your professional life that was genuinely building momentum before you introduced the friction that stopped it, the relationship that was real, that asked something of you that you recognized before you found the reason to leave. The creative work that exists in a folder on your desktop, complete enough to be seen, that has been there for longer than you want to say. Jung's framework asks one question about that thing, not what stopped you. What would you have had to become to have it? This is the question the shadow cannot survive. Because the shadow does not resist effort. You can work harder and the shadow does not care. You can optimize, plan, structure, commit, and the shadow waits. It does not resist what you do. It resists what you become. If the person who succeeds at the thing you are pursuing is someone fundamentally different from the person the conditions of your formation allowed you to be, more visible, more powerful, more separate from the people and the environment that shaped your original sense of what was permitted, the shadow will produce the behavior that prevents that person from existing. Every time, without effort, without your awareness. Think about the people in your life who have been there at the threshold. The ones you created distance from, not because they were harmful, but because their proximity to the person you were becoming made that person more real. And more real meant more exposed. And more exposed meant more visible to people who might not recognize you. What would they think? Would they still know me? Would I still know myself? Jung documented this specifically. The shadow's most sophisticated operation is not sabotage at the moment of action. It is the management of the people who make success feel real. The ones you subtly push away before the threshold, so that when you step back from it, you step back alone, and the retreat feels like your own decision. Here's what makes this genuinely difficult to name. The shadow does not announce itself. It does not produce feelings you can identify as self-sabotage. It produces thoughts that feel like clarity. I've thought about this carefully, and I don't think the timing is right. I've realized this isn't actually what I want. I've decided I need to focus on other things first. Notice the register of those thoughts. They sound like self-knowledge. They sound like the kind of considered, mature, self-aware decision that someone who really knows themselves would make. Jung's clinical observation was that this is when the shadow is operating at maximum effectiveness, when the retreat sounds most like wisdom, when the sabotage is most perfectly disguised as a choice. The shadow does not want you to fail. It wants you to remain recognizable, and the version of you that succeeds at what you are actually capable of is someone it does not recognize, so it removes them before you do. Jung did not believe this was a life sentence. He believed it was a default. And the difference between a life sentence and a default is this: a life sentence cannot be changed. A default continues until something interrupts it. The interruption is not willpower. Jung was explicit about this, and it is the part of his framework that separates it from every self-improvement model that has borrowed his language without his rigor. Willpower operates at the level of behavior. The shadow operates at the level of identity. Trying harder to do the thing the shadow is preventing does not address the shadow. It intensifies the conflict. Which is why the people who try hardest at the things the shadow blocks often experience the most precise sabotage. The harder they push toward the threshold, the more convincing the reason to stop becomes. This is not a flaw in you. This is the shadow doing exactly what it was designed to do. The intervention Jung described is not about trying harder. It is about making the ceiling visible. Tracing the pattern back, not to what happened at the threshold, but to where the ceiling was installed. The specific conditions, the specific environment, the specific messages, spoken and unspoken, that communicated what you were permitted to want, to be, to become. Because here is what Jung observed in the patients who successfully crossed their ceiling. They were not the ones who wanted it most. They were the ones who recognized, specifically and without softening, that the ceiling was not structural. It was contextual. It was installed by a set of circumstances, a family, an environment, a particular version of what the people around them could accommodate that no longer exist. The conditions that installed the ceiling are gone. The ceiling remains because no one told the shadow. This does not make crossing it effortless. Jung documented the crossing as the most psychologically demanding phase, because the shadow fights hardest precisely at the threshold. The closer you are to the thing that exceeds what you were taught you could have, the more convincing the reason to stop becomes. The more your own mind sounds like wisdom when it is actually prohibition, the shadow wins by default. Not by force, not by making you afraid, by producing a thought at exactly the right moment in exactly your own voice that you mistake for a decision. You have had that thought. You will have it again. The next time it arrives at the threshold, you will know what it is. But self-sabotage is only one direction the shadow moves. The other direction is toward the people you love most. Jung documented something he found more disturbing than sabotage: the unconscious drive to destroy what you have finally allowed yourself to have. Not when you were pursuing it. After you had it. The relationship that was real. The thing that was working. The specific mechanism that turns intimacy, the thing the shadow fears most, into the trigger for its most precise and most damaging work. Why you destroy what you love. That is next.